Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the messy end to Johnson's first attempts at preserving the Union, which actually seemed to do the opposite, and look at how the new scheme is, I think, also doomed to failure, if indeed Johnson even wants to make it work. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So yeah, second of the Scottish politics videos for today. But in order to try and repair some of the damage to the Union caused by Brexit, and actually when we come to it, Conservative policies in general, Boris Johnson set up a special unit to make the case for the Union. Now, in theory, this was across the UK, but let's be honest, it was mostly focusing on Scotland because that is where the most serious risk of fracture lies. But it was a complete disaster. It largely involves shoving flags in people's faces. A flag! You need a flag! You know, on their vaccines, you know, all the rest of it. And after yet another change of personnel, a couple of weeks ago, the unit basically disappeared up its own arse. Johnson disbanded it a few days ago and has replaced it with a new committee, which he will chair when he can be asked, presumably, that includes cabinet ministers. The committee seems to be comprised of, as far as I can tell, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak the Chancellor, Michael Gove, Cabinet Minister without any clearly defined job, the Secretaries of State for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, Alistair Jack, Simon Hart and Brandon Lewis, as well as David Frost, the unelected new Brexit Minister, or he will be tomorrow. Presumably it will be fed into by various think tanks for the meetings as well. I don't know the details, but that's how these things tend to work. I suspect I'll never actually know the details given how opaque the running of Johnson's government often is. Now, the move itself is not necessarily that surprising in a way, because the issue of the Union for the Conservative and Unionist Party, to give it its full title, has always been a bit vexed. See, on the one hand, the party is genuinely crammed full of what call themselves One Nation Tories who genuinely want to preserve the Union. On the other hand, there are also a lot of people who are attracted to the party because of its potential to give them personal power. People at the top of the party, whether MPs, major donors, other lobbyists or just prominent members, would find it a lot easier to consolidate that power if the Union did split. The Conservatives are largely out on their own in terms of British politics. This has one major benefit to them and one major drawback. The major benefit is that they do not generally have to split their vote with like-minded parties because there are none, or there weren't. If Farage's Reform UK party gets off the ground for 2024, then maybe, but just as in 2019, it's just as likely that they will not actually work against each other too badly. However, the progressive parties in the UK, Labour, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the SNP, Plaid Cymru, and the non-lunatics in Northern Irish politics are all too often competing with each other, nicking each other's votes, you know, rather than focusing on the real opponents. This is a huge boost to the Conservatives, and thanks in conjunction to first past the post, helps them win 100% of the power with much less than 50% of the votes almost all the time. In this way, a socially liberal society keeps ending up with a reckless capitalist government with no respect for human rights. But there's a drawback too. Whenever the progressive parties do work together, the Conservatives lose because, well, they don't have that much in the way of allies. For example, after Theresa May lost her majority in 2017, she was only saved because the DUP members were just about enough to give her a working majority. If this had not been the case, she'd have been completely knackered. This is why, looking ahead to 2024, we don't need to get too despondent that Labour have basically an impossible task to form a solid government. That's not happening. I hold no hopes for that at all. The swing required is like nothing our political history has ever thrown up. Yes, I know records are there to be broken, but this would be like beating the world record for the 100-metre dash by 2 whole seconds. But Labour don't need to win a solid majority. They don't even need to win more seats than the Conservatives, although that would make things less messy. They just need to make sure that the number of Conservative MPs plus the number of DUP MPs doesn't equal half the seats in Parliament. And then back to the Union. So the Conservatives regularly get over half the seats in England. much more than half. This does not occur elsewhere. They get seats in Scotland and Wales, but never anywhere near 50%. They get nothing in Northern Ireland. And given that the threshold for forming a government is getting just over half the seats, this would become a lot easier for them if Scotland and Northern Ireland at least are out of the picture. Wales potentially too, but that's not such a drag on them. So if you're in the Conservative Party purely for power and you're pragmatic, then it's actually in your interest for the UK to break up. As a result, I absolutely guarantee that there are senior Conservatives who would welcome the end of the UK, just so long as you don't get the blame. So we'll never know who they are, really, because they will never even tell their closest confidants. Which is why I'm never quite sure about the latest schemes to save the Union from the Conservatives. On the one hand, if Johnson genuinely wants to preserve the UK, absolutely you would abolish the unit that has failed time and time again and set up a new one. You try something else. It's what you do when you fail. But it is a committee of vain, arrogant and patronising ministers. Are they really going to do any better? We're told that Michael Gove is the main driver in this committee of making devolution work, which is an odd move for someone who was against devolution. But Gove is a practical man. It's entirely possible that he genuinely sees the need to show the UK the benefits of being in the Union, and of course sees devolution as key to that. The problem is that he doesn't really believe in it. None of them do. And sure, a seasoned debater like Michael Gove can absolutely argue anything, but you do your best job arguing for anything if you actually believe in it. And let me tell you why I think this latest attempt will fail. It's not because Brexit and the Conservatives have already done their damage and it's too late. This may be true, but that's not inevitable, as I was alluding to earlier on, and therefore not a reason to deride this latest attempt. Devolution itself shows you why this won't work. See, the purpose of devolution is to give as much decision making as possible into more regional bases. A properly devolved nation gets all the benefits of being part of a large collective with an influential presence on the world stage, with all of the benefits of making fine-tuned decisions based on local needs to take into account those differences around the country that cannot possibly be appreciated centrally. Even if you had a Prime Minister who could be arsed reading all the reports, which we don't. So how would devolution work? Well, what would happen is the government would say, right, this is the money needed for the schemes in Scotland. That would go direct to the Scottish Parliament because after all, they know what's going to be best, or they've got the best chance of knowing what's best for Scotland. Is this how it's going to be? No. The Internal Market Bill basically grabbed that decision making from Holyrood and transferred it to Westminster. The problem is that party politics being what it is, that money would be provided by the Conservatives but spent by the SNP. Now you can see immediately where party politics goes wrong here, because there'd be no public show of a great team effort, their opponents. The money spent well would be claimed by both the SNP and the Conservatives as their input. The SNP would say, well, we allocated it correctly, we're the best people to manage your money. The Conservatives would say, well, we were the ones who actually decided the overall budget. And where the money's not spent as well, it would be condemned by the other side as the result of incompetent interference on the other. So it's completely doomed to failure because the Conservatives are sensitive to this. They want to claim all the credit for, the economy in Scotland, which means they need to put their stamp on everything. They don't want the Scottish Parliament to make decisions because there's not enough Scottish MSPs. It also doesn't help that the Conservatives calibrate their public messages for the south of England, where the bulk of the population live and where they draw their major support from. The problem with this is that that message, calibrated to play on the prejudices in the south, absolutely grates some people from elsewhere that are left out. And the further away you get, the more that message pisses them off. And even the more populated parts of the south of Scotland are really quite a long way from Surrey and Kent. But as I alluded to earlier, we don't actually know that Johnson or Gove want to save the Union at all. It's possible that they want to give the strong impression of doing so, but to ultimately lose it. And if the Union breaks when they're no longer in government, they completely get away with the blame, at least amongst their own supporters. because that's the thing. If you look at a government that says this unit hasn't worked for shoring up support for the union, we'll create a new one, it could be a sign that they genuinely want to save the union, or it could be a sign that they just want to look like they want to save the union, but in actual fact, keep breaking it up. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.